It started as nothing more than a casual recording, the kind of video people take, without thinking much about it, just another moment captured in the endless stream of digital memories. But what this footage revealed was something far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. When Alex Daniels picked up his camera that evening, he was only trying to document a quiet weekend at his brother's cabin, deep in the woods of northern Maine. The plan was simple: a few days away from the city, no distractions, just fresh air and family. His older brother Mark had invited him up, promising a break from their stressful lives, a chance to reconnect like they used to when they were kids. Alex had always looked up to Mark, charming, confident, the kind of person who could talk his way out of anything. But over the years, something had changed. Mark had become more secretive, his temper a little shorter, his presence a little heavier, as if he was carrying something he couldn't let go of. Alex hadn't thought much of it at the time. After all, family is family. But that was before he pressed record and unknowingly captured the one piece of evidence that would unravel everything. The cabin itself was nothing special, an old, weathered structure surrounded by miles of dense trees. The kind of place where the silence feels too thick, where shadows stretch just a little too far at night. But Alex wasn't afraid of the isolation. If anything, he welcomed it. What he didn't welcome was the uneasy feeling that started creeping in almost as soon as he arrived. It was the way Mark seemed on edge, the way his laughter never quite reached his eyes, the way he kept checking his phone when he thought no one was looking. Alex dismissed it at first, convincing himself that he was overthinking things. Maybe work was stressing Mark out. Maybe he had something else on his mind. But then there were the sounds in the night, soft movements just outside the cabin, the crunch of leaves, when no one was supposed to be there, the brief flicker of a flashlight in the distance. Alex told himself it was just his imagination, but a small nagging part of him wasn't so sure. So, when he woke up to find Mark missing in the middle of the night, his gut told him to grab his camera. Not for any real reason, just instinct, curiosity. Something he couldn't quite explain. He turned it on, stepped outside, and followed the dim glow of Mark's flashlight through the trees, careful not to make a sound. He didn't expect to find anything. He didn't expect to see what he saw. As Alex crept through the underbrush, keeping his distance, the camera rolling in his shaking hands, he caught sight of his brother standing in the clearing alone, tense, whispering to someone Alex couldn't see. The words weren't clear at first, just hushed fragments carried away by the wind. But then, Mark stepped closer to something half hidden beneath the trees, and Alex adjusted the zoom. That's when his breath caught in his throat. His brother wasn't alone, and whatever Mark was doing out there in the middle of the night, whatever he was trying to hide it, was something he never wanted anyone to see. Alex's thoughts spiraled back to the past few months, searching for answers buried in overlooked details. Mark had always been the golden boy, the one who could charm his way out of anything, the one who never seemed to struggle the way others did. But recently, cracks had started to show. His business had taken a hit, something about a bad investment, though he brushed it off as nothing. Then there was his sudden fixation on selling their late parents' house, despite the fact that neither of them had even discussed it before. And of course, there was that strange night 2 weeks ago, the last time Alex had seen Mark before this trip, when he had shown up at Alex's apartment looking disheveled, distracted, not quite himself. He had downplayed it, blaming exhaustion, but there had been something else in his eyes that night. Fear. And now, watching him through the lens, it was clear that whatever had been weighing on him was far from over. The more Alex thought about it, the more uneasy he felt. Was Mark in trouble? Was this some kind of desperate attempt to fix whatever mess he had gotten himself into? Or was it something worse? The possibilities tangled in Alex's mind, each one more unsettling than the last. Maybe it was nothing, maybe Mark was just meeting someone for a harmless, if unusual, reason. But then why the secrecy? Why the nervous glances over his shoulder, the whispered urgency in his voice. And why, as Alex strained to hear the conversation, did his brother suddenly freeze, his head snapping toward the trees, as if he had sensed he was being watched? Alex barely had time to react before Mark took a slow, deliberate step forward, his flashlight sweeping across the clearing. The beam danced over the trees, the leaves trembling in the soft wind, the silence stretching unbearably thin. Alex's grip tightened on the camera as he pressed himself lower, willing himself to become invisible. But something about Mark's posture had changed his usual confidence, replaced with something colder, sharper. It was in that moment that Alex realized something chilling. His brother wasn't just looking for someone in the woods. He was hunting. And if Alex wasn't careful, he might be the one who got caught. Alex could barely hear his own breath over the pounding in his chest as he pressed himself deeper into the shadows, his grip tightening on the camera. Mark's flashlight cut through the darkness in erratic sweeps, each flicker of light forcing Alex to shrink lower, his mind racing with 1,000 questions and no clear answers. He had always trusted his brother, had always believed that despite whatever personal struggles or bad decisions Mark had made over the years, he was, at his core, a good person. But there was nothing good about the way he was standing in that clearing, his head snapping from side to side, his posture rigid with tension. He wasn't just searching, he was anticipating. Alex could see it now, the way his brother's fingers hovered near his jacket pocket, like he was ready to grab something at a moment's notice. A knife? A gun? The thought sent a cold shiver down Alex's spine. But it wasn't just Mark's behavior that unsettled him. It was the fact that someone else had to be out there. His brother hadn't been speaking to himself. Someone had answered him just before Alex adjusted the zoom and caught sight of that shadowed figure, shifting just beyond the reach of the flashlight. Someone who didn't want to be seen. The pieces weren't fitting together, and the more Alex thought about it, the more tangled everything became. His brother wasn't reckless secretive, yes, manipulative when he needed to be, but never careless. If he was meeting someone out here, in the middle of the woods, in the dead of night, it had to be for a reason. But what kind of reason justified this level of secrecy? What kind of reason made a man look over his shoulder like he expected the darkness itself to turn against him? Alex thought back to the last few months, searching for anything that might explain how they had gotten here. Mark had always been ambitious, always chasing the next big thing, but lately, his risks had started catching up with him. A failed investment, a sudden desperation to liquidate assets, the way he had started showing up to family gatherings with vague, deflective excuses about needing to tie up loose ends. At first, Alex had assumed it was just another business setback. But now, crouching there in the freezing dirt, watching his brother's every move, he wasn't so sure. And then there was the house. Their parents' old home, the place they had both grown up in, the one thing Alex had always assumed they would hold on to, if only for the memories. But Mark had been determined to sell, pushing harder than made sense, avoiding questions about why he needed the money so urgently. And it wasn't just Mark acting strange, other people had started asking questions too. Just a few weeks ago, their childhood neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, had left Alex a cryptic voicemail about some men who had been seen lurking around the property late at night. She hadn't gone into detail, but her voice had carried an unmistakable edge of unease. Alex had brushed it off at the time, assuming it was just paranoia. But now he wasn't so sure. Then there was the man at the gas station. Alex hadn't thought much about it then, just another stranger in line. Another set of tired eyes scanning the newspaper rack as Alex filled up his car. But looking back, something about him stood out. The way he had looked at Alex, a second too long before turning away. The way he had seemed to recognize him without saying anything. It had been subtle, just a flicker of something unreadable in his expression, but Alex hadn't forgotten it. And now, with the camera rolling, his brother acting like a cornered animal, and some unseen presence lurking just beyond the trees, He was beginning to wonder if that moment had meant something after all. Mark suddenly turned, his flashlight dipping lower, his stance shifting like he was preparing for something. Alex held his breath, fighting every instinct telling him to move, to run, to make his presence known and demand answers. But something in his gut told him that revealing himself now would be a mistake. Because in that moment, as the wind whispered through the trees and the flashlight flickered against the damp earth, Mark's next word sent a fresh wave of ice through Alex's veins. "Did you bring it?" A pause, a shuffle of movement in the dark. Then, a low voice, one that Alex had never heard before, replied, "Yeah, but we have a problem." Alex's stomach twisted as he realized two things at once. One, whatever Mark was wrapped up in, it was far worse than he had ever imagined. And two, if Mark or his unknown companion took even 2 steps in the wrong direction, they would find him. And then whatever this was, it wouldn't just be a secret anymore. It would be something Alex might not live to understand. Alex barely dared to breathe as he watched his brother's silhouette shift in the darkness, his grip tightening on the flashlight as he stepped closer to the unseen figure. The words "we have a problem" hung in the cold night air, heavy with implications Alex couldn't yet understand. He strained to hear what came next, but just as the unknown man started to speak, a sudden gust of wind rattled the branches above, drowning out the next few words. Alex cursed under his breath, shifting ever so slightly to get a better angle, careful not to make a sound. His fingers ached from gripping the camera so tightly, but he forced himself to keep filming. He had no idea what Mark had gotten himself into, but if his gut was right, this footage might be the only way to piece together the truth. And then, just as quickly as the conversation had started, it ended. Mark nodded stiffly, slipping something into his jacket pocket before turning back toward the cabin, his flashlight flickering as he moved. The other man stayed put, standing motionless in the clearing for several long seconds before finally retreating into the woods, his figure swallowed up by the shadows. Alex remained frozen, every instinct screaming at him to follow, to find out who this man was and what they were talking about. But before he could make a decision, a noise from behind made his blood run cold. A soft snap, the unmistakable sound of a footstep on a dry twig. Alex whipped around, heart hammering in his chest, but there was nothing there. Just the trees, dark and unmoving, the wind rustling through the leaves. But he wasn't imagining it. He had spent enough time in the outdoors to know the difference between the natural shifting of the forest and the deliberate movement of something or someone trying to stay hidden. Panic coiled in his stomach as he slowly backed away, realizing for the first time that he might not be the only one watching tonight. Someone else was out here. Someone who had been standing close enough to hear everything, just as he had. By the time Alex made it back to the cabin, his mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, none of them leading to answers that made sense. He shut the door behind him as quietly as possible, his hands trembling as he locked it. He needed time to think, time to go through the footage and figure out what he had actually captured. But as he reached into his pocket to retrieve the memory card, his stomach lurched. It was gone. His breath caught as he patted his jacket, searching desperately for the tiny piece of plastic that held everything he had seen. But it wasn't there. His mind raced. Had he dropped it in the woods? Had he been so focused on Mark that he hadn't noticed it slipping out? Or worse, had someone taken it? Before he could process the thought, his phone buzzed on the table, the sudden vibration making him jump. He hesitated before reaching for it, his pulse still racing from the shock of the missing footage. A blocked number. His first instinct was to ignore it, but something told him to answer. He swallowed hard and pressed the phone to his ear. A low voice, distorted as if coming through a voice changer, spoke just 3 words before the line went dead. "Stop digging, Alex." The silence that followed was deafening. Alex's fingers hovered over the screen, his mind struggling to keep up with what had just happened. Whoever this was, They knew his name. They knew he had been looking into something he wasn't supposed to see. And if they had his footage, it meant they had been close enough to take it without him even noticing. His blood ran cold as a new, more terrifying thought formed in his mind. This wasn't just about Mark anymore. Frustration and unanswered questions. She had been Mark's ex, but more than that, she had been the one person who had warned Alex, really warned him that something was wrong. That Mark wasn't who he pretended to be. At the time, Alex had brushed it off as bitterness, the remnants of a messy breakup and lingering resentment. But now, as he pressed the phone to his ear, her voice came through with a breathless urgency that made his pulse spike. "Alex, I think someone's following me." His heart slammed against his ribs as he pushed away from the table, pacing toward the window. Outside, the woods stretched endlessly into the night, shadows twisting between the trees, and suddenly the isolation of the cabin felt suffocating. "Where are you?" he asked, forcing his voice to stay calm despite the rising panic clawing at his chest. "I don't know," Natalie admitted, her voice shaking. "I was at work, and when I left, I noticed this black SUV parked across the street. I didn't think anything of it at first, but then I saw it again when I stopped for gas. And now, Alex, they're here. Outside my apartment." A sharp breath escaped Alex as he pressed his fingers to his forehead, trying to think. It wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. Did they do anything? Did you see who was inside? No, but... She trailed off, and for a moment, all he could hear was the distant hum of a television in the background. Then, her voice dropped lower. "I got a message, Alex. Same as you. Blocked. Number. They told me to stop looking." His stomach twisted into knots as he turned away from the window, his thoughts racing. Natalie shouldn't have even been involved. She hadn't spoken to Mark in nearly a year, hadn't had any reason to be caught up in whatever mess he had gotten himself into. But someone had gone out of their way to warn her, just like they had warned him. Which meant one of two things: either Natalie knew something she hadn't realized was important, or someone thought she did. "Listen to me," Alex said, his voice low but firm. "Pack a bag and leave. Go somewhere crowded, stay at a hotel, call someone you trust. Just don't go home. I already tried." Her breath hitched, and for the first time, real fear bled into her voice. "My car won't start." Alex's blood ran cold. This wasn't random intimidation. This was calculated, deliberate. Someone was sending a message, and they weren't just watching. They were controlling the situation, tightening the grip before either of them could react. Before Alex could respond, something outside caught his attention. A flicker of movement near the tree line, too fast to be the wind. He moved toward the window, his breath catching as his eyes adjusted to the darkness. And then he saw it. A figure standing just beyond the clearing, half hidden by the shadows. Watching. Alex's entire body locked up as his mind struggled to keep up. Had they been there the whole time? Had they followed him from the woods? Or worse, had they never left? "Natalie," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "you need to get out of there. Right now." A long silence stretched between them, heavy with something neither of them wanted to say. Then, in a voice so quiet he almost didn't hear it, she whispered, "I think it's already too late." The line went dead. Alex stood frozen, the phone still pressed against his ear, even though the line had already gone dead. A hollow, ringing silence filled the space around him, but inside, his pulse thundered, each beat slamming harder than the last. His eyes stayed locked on the figure in the trees, a motionless silhouette, barely distinguishable from the night itself. Every muscle in his body screamed for him to move, to run, to do something, but his limbs refused to cooperate. He felt like a trapped animal, backed into a corner without a clear way out. And then, just as suddenly as he had noticed them, the figure shifted. Not with hesitation, not with uncertainty, with purpose. the slow, deliberate kind of movement that told Alex they weren't in a hurry because they didn't need to be. A fresh wave of panic slammed into him as he backed away from the window, forcing himself to think. Natalie was gone. Or worse, taken. Someone had been following her. Someone had made sure she couldn't leave. And now, as Alex tried to make sense of the chaos unraveling around him, the terrifying truth became undeniable. He wasn't just looking into something dangerous, he was the next target. He grabbed his keys, his mind already screaming at him to get out. The cabin was too exposed, too isolated. And if someone had been watching him from the woods, that meant they had been close enough to make a move whenever they wanted. Maybe they were testing him. Maybe they wanted to see how he would react. Or maybe they were just waiting for the right moment. His breath came fast and uneven as he yanked open the door, stepping out onto the porch, eyes darting across the dark expanse of trees. The cold night air pressed in around him, but all he could feel was the prickle of unseen eyes lingering somewhere in the distance. He barely made it down the steps when his phone buzzed again, vibrating violently in his grip. He glanced down, his stomach twisting at the sight of another block number. His thumb hovered over the screen for a second before he forced himself to answer, pressing the phone against his ear with a hand that wasn't entirely steady. A distorted voice, low and hollow, filled the silence. "You were warned." The bottom dropped out of Alex's stomach. His grip on the phone tightened as he whipped his head around, searching for any sign of movement. "Where is she?" he demanded, his voice sharp with fear and anger, though he barely recognized it himself. "If you did something to her." A quiet chuckle. Cold. Detached. "You should worry about yourself, Alex." His breath caught, his heartbeat hammering so hard it felt like it might shake him apart. His mind raced, trying to grasp onto something, anything that made sense. But before he could say another word, a sharp click cut through the silence, followed by a long, dead tone. The call had ended. A strange, suffocating stillness fell over him as he stood there, phone gripped tightly in his hand, breath coming in shallow bursts. His thoughts clawed for an explanation, but none of them led to anything that didn't make his stomach twist with dread. They knew his name. They knew where he was. They knew Natalie. But how? How had this all spiraled out of control so fast? And then, a new horror set in. His car. He turned so fast, he nearly lost his footing, sprinting toward the vehicle parked just beyond the cabin's porch. His fingers fumbled with the keys as he reached the driver's side, yanking the door open and sliding inside. The cabin's porch light barely reached this far, leaving the surrounding area steeped in thick, impenetrable darkness. Every instinct screamed at him to drive, to put as much distance between himself and this place as possible. But when he jammed the key into the ignition and twisted nothing, the engine didn't turn over. Not even a flicker of power. His hands turned clammy against the steering wheel as his mind snapped back to what Natalie had said just minutes ago. "My car won't start." This wasn't a coincidence. His breath came shallow as a chilling realization set in. Whoever had been watching him, whoever had been lurking in the trees, had already been close enough to sabotage his escape. A sharp rustling came from the woods to his right, the unmistakable sound of someone moving through the underbrush. Not in a hurry, not running, just moving, closing in. Alex's fingers scrambled for his phone, but before he could unlock it, the sound of metal scraping against metal filled the air. The passenger side door handle. Someone was trying to get in. Alex barely had time to react before the handle stopped moving, the air thick with an unbearable tension that sent his nerves into overdrive. His entire body was wound so tight it felt like a single wrong movement would snap him in half. Then tap. A single knock against the window. Gentle, almost playful. And that was somehow worse than anything else. His breath hitched, every part of him frozen in sheer terror. He didn't dare look. He didn't want to see what was on the other side of the glass. But before he could decide what to do, his phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with another block number. A new message appeared. Nowhere to run. Alex felt the blood drain from his face. He was trapped. The car wouldn't start. The cabin was no longer safe. And out there, in the darkness, someone was waiting. Watching. Alex's entire body locked up, every nerve screaming at him to react, to fight, to run something. But there was nowhere to go. The message on his phone burned into his brain as he stared at the dimly lit screen, the words pressing into his chest like a weight he couldn't shake. Nowhere to run. The knocking had stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. Every second stretched out, thick with the kind of dread that made his skin crawl. He didn't know if they were still there, standing just beyond the thin layer of glass, separating him from whatever nightmare had been closing in since the moment he started digging into Mark's secret. His breath came in ragged bursts, his heart slamming against his ribs so hard it physically hurt. He needed to move. He needed to do something. And then his phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, just a single name. "Turn around, Alex." His breath caught, fingers tightening around the device as his eyes flicked up to the rearview mirror. At first, all he saw was his own reflection, the wild look in his eyes making him look almost unrecognizable. But then just barely, in the dim light he saw it. A shadow shifting in the back seat. Pure terror surged through him as he twisted around, his body moving before his brain could even catch up. But before he could scream, before he could fight, a hand shot forward, clamping over his mouth in a suffocating grip. A voice low, calm, too calm, spoke right against his ear. "Stop fighting. You're not going to die tonight." The words sent a cold, searing dread down his spine, but there was something even worse about the familiarity of the voice. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't the distorted, unnatural sound from the phone calls. It was someone he knew. The grip loosened just enough for Alex to wrench himself away, his body colliding with the driver's side door. His mind scrambled to process what he was seeing as the figure in the back seat leaned forward, the dim light finally revealing their face. And just like that, the floor dropped out from under him. It was Mark. Alex's breath left him in a shuddering, disbelieving exhale, his head shaking before he even realized he was doing it. His brother, his own brother, had been in the car with him this entire time, had been watching him, had let him spiral into paranoia, into fear, only to reveal himself now, like a monster stepping out from under the bed, just to prove it had been there all along. What the Alex's voice cracked as the words fought their way out, his mind still reeling, still trying to convince him this wasn't real. "What the hell is going on, Mark? What is this? What did you do?" Mark didn't flinch. He didn't try to explain. He just stared at Alex, his face unreadable, his body terrifyingly still. "You weren't supposed to get involved," he finally said, his voice flat, devoid of anything human. "I warned you." Alex felt a surge of rage cut through the fear. His fists clenched, his pulse pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. "You warned me? Are you serious right now? You've been playing me this whole time, watching me, setting me up, and now what? You're just gonna sit there and act like you're the victim?" His voice was rising, fury boiling over. "Where's Natalie? What did you do to her?" For the first time, something flickered across Mark's face. It was brief, so quick Alex almost missed it, but it was their hesitation. "She's alive," Mark said, but the words weren't reassuring. They were just cold. "But I need you to listen to me, Alex. And I need you to do exactly what I say. Because if you don't, you're going to get both of us killed." Alex's stomach twisted into knots. This wasn't making sense. None of it. His entire life, Mark had been the one person he could always count on, the responsible one, the golden child, the brother who always had his back. And now, Suddenly, he was what? Some kind of manipulative psychopath sending threats in the middle of the night? None of it added up. But one thing was clear. Mark wasn't just a victim in this. "You need to start talking right now," Alex said, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. "Because if you don't, I swear to God, they know you're here." Mark's words sliced through the air like a blade, stopping Alex cold. His brother leaned in slightly, his expression dark. "They've been watching you since the moment you started poking around. They let you think you were one step ahead, but you never were. And now, because of you, I had to change the plan." Alex's stomach twisted. What plan? But Mark ignored the question. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled something out, shoving it into Alex's hand before he could resist. It was a burner phone, cheap and untraceable. "When this rings," Mark said, his voice eerily calm, "you answer it. No questions, no hesitation. You do exactly what they say, or they'll come for you next." Alex stared at the phone, his fingers numb around the plastic shell. "Who, Mark?" His voice came out hoarse. "Who the hell are you working for?" Mark hesitated again. But this time, when he spoke, there was something else in his voice, something Alex had never heard from him before. Fear. Alex barely had time to process the searing pain in his knees from hitting the gravel before strong hands hauled him up, gripping his arms with the kind of force that sent a clear message. This wasn't just a warning. His pulse slammed against his ribs, his breath sharp and ragged as he struggled against the hands restraining him. But it was useless. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, blinding him for a second. And then he heard the voice again, closer this time, low and edged with an authority that left no room for argument. "Move." He didn't know where they were taking him, but every survival instinct screamed at him not to go willingly. He twisted against the grip, but the hands tightened like iron clamps, shoving him forward as his heels scraped against the dirt. The headlights behind him cast long shadows, making everything feel distorted, unreal, like he had stepped into a version of his life that didn't belong to him. He tried to glance toward the vehicles, to get a glimpse of who these people were, but before he could, a sharp tug on his shoulder forced his head forward again. They weren't letting him see their faces. That realization sent a sick wave of fear through him. These weren't just hired thugs sent to rough him up. If they didn't care about him recognizing them, that meant they weren't planning on letting him walk away from this. A car door creaked open, and for a brief panicked second, Alex thought they were about to throw him inside, drive him off to some unknown location where no one would ever find him. But instead, they shoved him down onto his knees, right there in the dirt, the cold night air thick with the sound of his own ragged breathing. A new voice cut through the silence. Smooth, measured, too calm for the situation. "Alex." He forced himself to look up, blinking against the glare of the headlights, and his stomach lurched when he finally saw who was standing there. Detective Harris. Of all the people Alex had suspected of being involved in whatever the hell this was, the detective hadn't even crossed his mind. Harris had been the one investigating Natalie's disappearance. The one asking questions. The one Alex had considered turning to when things started spiraling out of control. But now, standing there with his hands in his pockets, a vague, almost disappointed look on his face, Harris wasn't a lawman looking to solve a case. He was something else entirely. "I told Mark this was going to happen," Harris said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had already made up his mind about how this night was going to end. "I told him you wouldn't let it go." Alex's skin went cold. His brother had known this man, had been working with him, had been keeping him in the dark about all of it. What Alex swallowed against the tightness in his throat. "What do you want?" Harris tilted his head slightly, studying him like he was some kind of puzzle missing a piece. "I think the better question, Alex, is what you want." His voice was calm, but the tension in the air was anything but. The men holding Alex didn't loosen their grip. The headlights cast sharp, unforgiving angles across the detective's face, making him look older, harder, more dangerous. "You see," Harris continued, crouching down slightly to meet Alex's eye level, "Mark was supposed to handle this quietly. Make sure you didn't get involved. Make sure you didn't start asking the wrong people the wrong questions. But now, here we are." He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You put me in a difficult position, Alex." Alex's fingers curled into fists at his sides. "Where's Natalie?" Harris held his gaze for a long, uncomfortable moment before his lips pressed into something that might have been a smirk under different circumstances. "She's alive," he said simply. "For now." A fresh wave of rage ignited in Alex's chest, white-hot and uncontrollable. He lunged forward, but the hands gripping him yanked him back, shoving him down harder, grinding his knees into the dirt. Harris didn't flinch, didn't even react. He just sighed, almost like he was bored. "This is the part where you listen very carefully, because I don't like repeating myself," Harris said, his voice still unsettlingly level. "You have two choices." The words sent a slow, creeping dread through Alex's bones. "One," Harris continued, holding up a single finger, "you forget everything. Walk away. Pretend you never found those messages, never followed Natalie's trail, never started asking about things that don't concern you. If you do that, I let you go. I let Mark go. And maybe Natalie gets to live a little longer." Alex's pulse thundered in his ears, drowning out everything but the sheer weight of what he was being told. Harris's words weren't just a threat, they were a death sentence wrapped in false choice. Walk away and pretend none of this ever happened, or dig deeper and guarantee that Natalie, Mark and himself would be swallowed whole by whatever force had already laid claim to them. His breath came in short, sharp bursts, his body fighting between survival instincts and the overwhelming rage clawing at his throat. Every fiber of his being screamed that Harris was lying, that this was some twisted manipulation to break him down, but then he saw it. The slight, almost imperceptible way Harris's gaze flicked past him toward the dark stretch of road beyond the headlights. A brief moment of hesitation, a sliver of fear. Harris was afraid of someone. Something. Alex gritted his teeth, forcing his body to stay still, even as his hands ached to lash out. If Harris wasn't the one pulling the strings, then who was? He needed time. He needed information. But time was the one thing he didn't have, and information was a luxury that had already cost him too much. Harris let the silence stretch before finally lifting a second finger. "Option 2, he said, as if he were discussing something as mundane as a business deal. "You keep digging. You keep pushing. You refuse to let this go. And in return, I promise you won't make it through the week alive." His voice remained calm, but there was something colder behind it now, something final. "This isn't just about you anymore, Alex. It never was. You're in the middle of something much bigger than you can possibly understand. The only reason you're still breathing is because someone his gaze flicked to the burner phone in Alex's pocket, wants you alive. But I wouldn't count on that kindness lasting much longer." The weight of his words settled like lead in Alex's stomach, but his mind was already working, already grasping at the puzzle pieces that had been slipping through his fingers since this nightmare began. This wasn't just about Natalie. This wasn't just about Mark. This wasn't even about Harris. There was someone or something operating in the shadows, pulling strings so carefully, so precisely, that even men like Harris, men who played by their own rules, were afraid. The headlights behind him shifted slightly as another car door opened, the sound jarring in the tense silence. Alex didn't turn, but he felt it, another presence stepping closer. The hands gripping his arms tensed slightly, as if whoever was holding him was waiting for something. Then, a voice. Familiar. "Let him go." Alex's blood ran cold. The hands on his arms withdrew immediately, but his body stayed frozen, his muscles locked with the kind of dread that seeped into his bones. Slowly, cautiously, he turned his head toward the source of the voice, his breath catching the moment his eyes locked onto the figure standing just beyond the glow of the headlights. No, this wasn't possible. Mark. Not beaten. Not running. Not desperate and afraid, like he had been in the car. No, this was a different Mark. A Mark with squared shoulders, a calm expression, and a presence that sent a slow, paralyzing horror creeping up Alex's spine. Because Mark wasn't just involved. He was in control. Harris didn't react, didn't look surprised. He simply exhaled, shaking his head as if mildly inconvenienced. "You're making a mistake," he muttered. A sharp breath rattled through Alex's lungs as he forced his mind to work through the sheer horror of the situation. The voice on the phone wasn't giving him a choice. He could fight, try to run, try to resist, but it wouldn't matter. The rain had started again, slow at first, then steady, washing away the blood that had dried on Alex's hands. He didn't know how long he had been sitting there, staring blankly at the empty road ahead, his body too numb to move, too exhausted to process what had just happened. The echoes of the last few hours still clung to him like ghosts, every sound, every face, every moment replaying in his mind on an endless loop. Harris was gone. Mark was gone. The truth, the one he had fought so hard to uncover, had unraveled before him in ways he never could have imagined. And now, standing at the edge of it all, he wasn't sure if he had won or lost. The voice on the phone had been right. The truth hadn't been a victory. It had been a sentence. From the moment he answered that call, he had been walking a path that only led in one direction. The organization, the thing bigger than Harris, bigger than Mark, bigger than anything he had ever thought possible, had been controlling everything from the start, and by the time Alex had realized it, he had already played his role exactly as they had intended. The real enemy had never been Harris. It had never even been Mark. It had been the unseen force that had turned them both into pawns, manipulating their choices, their fears, their desperation, until there was no way out. And Alex, despite all his efforts, despite every fight, every sacrifice, had walked straight into their hands. Natalie was safe now. At least, that's what they had told him. He would never know for sure, never get proof, never hear her voice telling him she was okay. That was the price of his compliance. They had given him her life in exchange for his silence. A trade. A compromise. He had done what they asked, followed their final instructions, and in the end, it hadn't been about exposing the truth, it had been about ensuring it stayed buried forever. Mark had known it too. That was why he had tried so hard to stop Alex from digging, why he had fought so desperately to keep him from following the trail. It had never been about loyalty or deception, it had been about survival. And when the moment finally came, when the choice had been forced upon them, Mark had made the only decision he could. Alex had been the one to pull the trigger. The thought made his stomach lurch, his hands tightening into fists as another wave of nausea threatened to pull him under. He had been forced to choose Mark's life or Natalie's. And in the end, Mark had made it easy for him. He hadn't begged. He hadn't fought. He had simply looked at Alex, his expression calm, accepting, as if he had known from the beginning that this was how it would end. And then, just before the final shot, he had said something that Alex would never be able to forget. "You don't understand now, but one day you will."